This is not fiction. This is my account recovered from a lost expedition log found months after my disappearance in Antarctica. I don't know if anyone will believe this. I don't know if I'm even sane. But this is what happened. My name is Dr. Nathan Miller. I am a climate scientist specializing in extreme weather patterns, employed by the United States Antarctic Research Program. The purpose of our mission was straightforward: collect atmospheric data, monitor ice core samples, and document long-term environmental changes in Antarctica. My team was stationed at McMurdo Base, one of the primary research stations on the continent, positioned on the southern tip of Ross Island. On February 12, 2018, I was assigned to perform a routine data collection run at one of our remote sensor sites. The site was located approximately 45 kilometers from the base, situated on a flat, open ice field known for rapid weather changes. Our protocol required us to maintain regular communication via the station's primary radio system and log every step in our mission journals for redundancy. At 8:37 hours, I departed the base on foot, wearing the standard cold weather expedition gear, an insulated parka rated for -80 degrees Celsius, thermal layers, an Arctic-grade face mask, and a GPS device, Garmin GipsMap 66i, designed for high-latitude operations. I carried a standard-issue satellite communicator, a handheld weather monitoring device, Kestrel 5500, a small pack of survival supplies including freeze-dried food and medical essentials, and a compact digital recorder for continuous documentation. The day began clear, with visibility exceeding 3 kilometers. Temperatures hovered at -45 degrees Celsius, consistent with seasonal expectations. My objective was to retrieve atmospheric readings from the remote station and replace 2 data log modules exhibiting irregular power fluctuations. The trek proceeded according to plan for the first 90 minutes. I followed pre-mapped coordinates, double-checking GPS waypoints at regular intervals. The terrain remained flat, with occasional snowdrifts up to half a meter in depth. I observed nothing out of the ordinary until approximately 10:23 hours, when cloud cover began forming rapidly on the horizon. At 10:45 hours, cloud density increased substantially, reducing visibility to approximately 800 meters. The Kestrel device registered a drop in atmospheric pressure from 985 HPa to 980 HPa over a 15-minute span. Wind velocity increased to 40 kilometers per hour. These conditions indicated the formation of a localized blizzard, a known hazard in Antarctic regions, but one that is typically forecasted well in advance. Despite these readings, the satellite communicator maintained signal strength with McMurdo Base. I made a standard check-in at 11 o'clock hours. The transmission succeeded without interference. My voice remained calm and measured. This is Dr. Miller, data collection run proceeding on schedule. Current position 7751S, 16,640 E, wind velocity 40 kilometers per hour. Pressure dropping incrementally, visibility deteriorating. Will update every 30 minutes. At 11:15 hours, the snow began falling more heavily. The visibility further decreased to approximately 300 meters. GPS coordinates remained stable, though satellite reception fluctuated slightly. I maintained a steady pace, relying on compass bearings and the GPS to navigate. At precisely 11:37 hours, the satellite communicator began to emit intermittent static. The device did not completely lose signal, but the clarity of my voice became distorted. I made a second attempt to check in. McMurdo Base, "This is Dr. Miller. Do you read me?" "Over." A pause followed. The only response was faint static. The communicator then emitted a series of unidentifiable low-frequency pulses for approximately 17 seconds before returning to regular static. I noted this anomaly in the recorder without commentary, in accordance with protocol. By 11:52 hours, the storm's intensity increased sharply. Wind velocity peaked at 70 kilometers per hour. Visibility dropped below 50 meters. My pace slowed, and I began to navigate by dead reckoning, estimating the distance covered based on time and average speed, factoring in the increasing resistance of the snow and wind. I encountered my first major obstacle at 12:07 hours, a low ice ridge that was not present in the satellite maps or earlier photographs. It was approximately 1.2 meters in height, semi-transparent due to a thin layer of new snow over ice. The ridge blocked my intended path. I made a calculated decision to circumnavigate it by moving laterally to the east, maintaining a constant heading of 110. At 12:45 hours, the satellite communicator lost signal entirely. Repeated attempts to re-establish contact failed. I logged the time with no emotional commentary, strictly noting the technical failure. By 13:12 hours, the wind was relentless, pushing me backward in several attempts. Snowdrifts began accumulating rapidly. My GPS device began showing errors, flashing between coordinates without stabilizing. The display read "GPS signal lost" intermittently. I attempted to recalibrate, following the manual's instructions, but the device remained unresponsive. At approximately 13:47 hours, with visibility near zero, I estimated my location based on the last known GPS reading and dead reckoning. I knew returning to McMurdo Base was no longer a viable option. The storm showed no sign of abating. Realizing the severity of the situation, I made the decision to seek shelter. I recalled an old government-issued cabin located approximately 2 kilometers southeast of my last position. The cabin was not part of the official mission parameters and did not appear on current expedition maps, but it was listed in declassified documents I had reviewed prior to departure. The documentation described it as an emergency shelter installed during Cold War era Antarctic expeditions, last maintained in the late 1980s. By 14:23 hours, I arrived at the cabin's coordinates. The structure was nearly buried under snowdrifts. The building was rectangular, constructed of reinforced metal panels, approximately 4 by 6 meters in size, with a small chimney protruding from one side. A small plaque near the entrance read, "Polar Research Outpost, Government Property, Strictly Unauthorized Entry Prohibited." The outer surface was encrusted in thick frost. I used a multi-tool to force the door open. It creaked and groaned under mechanical stress, revealing a narrow passageway into the interior. The air was stale cold and suffused with the faint scent of rust and old insulation. The cabin interior consisted of 2 primary rooms. The first was an entryway space containing storage shelves with several unopened cans of freeze-dried food, a dusty propane heater, several rusted tools, and a weathered analog radio receiver. The second room was a small workspace with a desk, filing cabinets, and an old, unused weather monitoring station. Dust particles floated in the beam of my headlamp, illuminated against the frost-covered surfaces. I placed the satellite communicator and GPS device on the desk, attempting to recharge the latter via the cabin's power supply. The system partially accepted the connection, but remained inconsistent. I set up the propane heater, carefully following manufacturer guidelines. After several attempts, The flame stabilized, emitting minimal heat but sufficient to prevent immediate frostbite. I began recording my status on the digital recorder. Day 1 inside the cabin. Temperature remains at -71 degrees Celsius. The storm shows no signs of slowing. Power supply appears functional, though limited. Food and water supply adequate for several days. No immediate threats observed. No sign of other life. With supplies rationed methodically and every action logged with exact timestamps, I settled into the routine of survival. I began melting snow in a small metal container over the propane heater, calculating volume and caloric intake required to sustain body function. I monitored my body temperature every 2 hours, noting subtle declines, but no critical threshold breaches. The radio emitted persistent static, but no coherent signals. Occasionally, faint low-frequency pulses interrupted the white noise. I recorded these anomalies without interpretation, solely as objective data points. I kept a constant journal of each movement, each calculation, each measured observation. My mindset remained pragmatic. Survival was a matter of protocol, not speculation. There was no one else here. Day 2 inside the cabin began at 7:03 hours. The storm continued unabated. The wind velocity sustained between 65 and 80 kilometers per hour. Visibility remained below 5 meters, as measured by the handheld Kestrel 5500 device. The temperature held steady at -71 degrees Celsius, with minor fluctuations of plus or -2 degrees. No change from the previous day. I conducted a full system check of the cabin's power supply. The propane heater's fuel gauge indicated approximately 75% capacity remaining. The analog radio receiver functioned intermittently, producing static interspersed with low-frequency pulses lasting approximately 17 to 20 seconds, occurring every 90 minutes. I consumed the first portion of my rations, one freeze-dried meal packet and 500 milliliters of water melted from compacted snow. I recorded the nutritional values and caloric content for reference. Body temperature readings were logged every 3 hours using the standard issue thermometric strip applied to the inner wrist. By 9:12 hours, I examined the documents located within the cabin's filing cabinet. The papers were yellowed and brittle, several typed on a mechanical typewriter. Most were technical schematics of unknown sensor arrays, detailed installation notes for remote measurement devices, and maintenance logs dated from 1984 to 1987. One set of handwritten pages was titled, Project Polaris Behavioral Study Logs. The author's identity was not provided. The entries were dated sporadically between December 1985 and March 1986. The logs described isolation experiments conducted on personnel at the outpost. No conclusive results were provided, only vague references to aberrant responses and unexplainable occurrences during extended isolation. I copied several pages for further analysis using my tablet's camera, ensuring digital preservation. At precisely 10:45 hours, I conducted a status check on the analog radio receiver. The static remained constant, punctuated by faint, unintelligible pulses. I recorded a 15-minute sample of the static for analysis. No voice patterns, no decipherable codes, only randomness. By 12:17 hours, I performed a perimeter inspection from inside the cabin's single window. The landscape remained uniform, an endless field of ice and snow. No tracks, no structures, no signs of other life. The wind continued to howl, exerting a low-frequency vibration against the walls of the cabin. I continued logging every action. I calculated that, with current fuel and food supply, I would have sufficient resources to last approximately 14 days under current conditions, provided no equipment failures occurred. At 14:38 hours, I observed faint footprints in the snow approximately 12 meters from the cabin's entrance. I recorded the event meticulously, photographing the impressions from multiple angles. The footprints appeared human in origin, size approximately 28 centimeters in length, boot tread pattern unidentifiable. There were no corresponding entries in my prior logs, nor did I recall passing that exact location during my approach. The tracks appeared fresh, as estimated by the minimal snow accumulation over the impressions. I monitored the footprints for 1 hour. They remained unchanged, neither expanding nor leading away further from the cabin. By 16:05 hours, I attempted to trace the footprints outward using the limited visibility conditions. I advanced 12 steps in the general direction of the trail, but encountered no further impressions. My headlamp did not reveal any objects, disturbances, or structures beyond the field of white. At 18:02 hours, I returned to the cabin. The static on the radio increased in intensity. The low-frequency pulses became slightly more frequent, now occurring every 72 minutes. I methodically continued to monitor body temperature and heart rate at regular intervals. No abnormalities detected aside from a mild increase in heart rate during the perimeter inspection, consistent with physical exertion. Food rationing remained strict. I reduced caloric intake to maintain sustainability, adjusting my daily allowance to 1,200 kilocalories, calculated to prevent significant weight loss over the projected 14-day period. At 20:17 hours, I prepared the evening water supply, melting snow in a metal container over the propane heater. The process was slow due to the heater's reduced efficiency, but produced sufficient water volume to meet the minimum required 500 milliliters per day. By 22:43 hours, I reviewed the data collected thus far. I cross-referenced the atmospheric readings against previously recorded data from McMurdo Station for the same period. All parameters fell within the expected range, except for one anomaly, a localized atmospheric pressure dip of approximately 5 HPA recorded at 10:30 hours, coinciding with the sudden onset of the blizzard. I documented the anomaly without conjecture, adhering strictly to empirical reporting standards. At 23:15 hours, I performed a routine inspection of the analog radio receiver. The static was louder than normal. The pulses were regular but not identical in duration or frequency pattern. I recorded a second 15-minute sample. There were no identifiable patterns upon immediate playback. At exactly 1:02 hours, day 3, I documented an auditory event. A faint, rhythmic tapping sound emanated from the far end of the cabin. The noise was intermittent, approximately one tap every 3 seconds, persistent over a duration of 17 minutes. I paused recording, activated the cabin's internal microphone array, and monitored sound levels. The tapping ceased precisely at 1:19 hours. I cross-referenced all security measures. No external windows or vents indicated openings large enough to account for the sound's origin. The cabin's structural integrity appeared uncompromised. My body temperature at this point was 36.1 degrees Celsius within safe range. Heart rate elevated to 88 beats per minute, consistent with heightened alertness but not stress-induced tachycardia. I repeated the auditory test at 4 o'clock hours. No similar events occurred. By 6:33 hours, I prepared another meal ration and continued documentation. All actions followed strict chronological sequence, ensuring no subjective interpretation. The storm remained constant. The footprints remained unchanged. The static pulses continued. No one else was present. Day 3 began at 7:05 hours. The storm continued to rage without change. Wind velocity remained between 70 and 85 kilometers per hour. Visibility did not exceed 2 meters. The outside temperature consistently held at minus 71 degrees Celsius, with negligible variation. My body temperature was stable at 36.1 degrees Celsius. Heart rate measured at 87 beats per minute. I maintained strict adherence to my logging protocol, noting each physiological reading, each action performed, every measured observation with precise timestamps. At 8:15 hours, I conducted a full inspection of the cabin's interior. No changes were observed in the physical condition of the structure. The propane heater functioned intermittently but provided minimal heat. The internal temperature fluctuated between minus 12 degrees Celsius and minus 18 degrees Celsius, dependent on the operational cycle of the heater. I examined the footprint impressions in the snow again. They remained present and unaltered. I documented the measurements anew: length 28.4 centimeters, tread pattern irregular, and unidentifiable, depth approximately 1.2 centimeters, suggesting a light individual, possibly between 55 to 70 kilograms in body weight. The impressions were approximately 12 meters from the entrance, consistently in the same position as recorded the previous day. At 9:47 hours, I began monitoring the analog radio receiver. The persistent static continued as before. Low-frequency pulses occurred every 70 minutes on average. No recognizable voice patterns, no identifiable Morse code sequences, no call signs. I maintained continuous recording for analysis. At precisely 11:03 hours, I conducted a system check on the satellite communicator. The device remained non-functional, no signals detected. Multiple recalibration attempts yielded the same result. By 12:22 hours, I began to prepare the midday ration. The freeze-dried food packets consisted of standard caloric composition: proteins, carbohydrates, minimal fats. I recorded exact mass of consumed portions. Hydration continued through melted snow, carefully filtered to eliminate particulate matter. At 14:17 hours, I observed the first subjective anomaly. The analog radio receiver, previously emitting only static and low-frequency pulses, emitted a brief burst of clear sound. The sound lasted approximately 2 seconds and resembled human speech but was entirely unintelligible. No words discernible. The burst occurred at exactly 14 hours 17 minutes and 32 seconds hours. I immediately increased the recording sample rate and documented the event with precise timestamps. At 16:03 hours, I performed another perimeter inspection through the cabin's single window. I utilized a thermal imaging sensor integrated into my handheld device. The surrounding terrain showed uniform thermal readings, consistent with ambient temperature. No heat signatures other than my own were detected. At 17:45 hours, the rhythmic tapping from the previous night recurred. The sound emanated from the far end of the cabin. Following the exact pattern, one tap every 3 seconds, sustained for precisely 17 minutes. I activated the internal microphone array to capture the audio. The tapping ceased at 18:02 hours without any intervention on my part. At 19:38 hours, I conducted a detailed analysis of the Project Polaris logs recovered from the cabin. The entries documented behavioral studies performed on isolated subjects. The researchers reported progressive psychological deterioration after periods exceeding 10 days in isolation. Symptoms included auditory hallucinations, paranoia, sleep disturbances, and inability to distinguish reality from subjective perception. One entry dated January 14, 1986, stated the following without further commentary. Subject 7 reports hearing voices outside the cabin, describes a persistent knocking, denies any physical evidence of other presence. Subject remains in isolation for a total of 72 hours. I transcribed the entry verbatim, avoiding interpretation. At 21:12 hours, I noted an increase in the static intensity. The low-frequency pulses began to shorten in interval, now occurring approximately every 55 minutes. I recorded continuous samples over the next 3 hours. By 0:01 hours, day 4, I was exhausted, but physically stable. My body temperature registered 35.9 degrees Celsius. Heart rate was elevated at 92 beats per minute, within acceptable survival parameters. I conducted a visual scan of the cabin's perimeter, using a handheld night vision device. The exterior remained unchanged. No movement detected. At 1:35 hours, I documented a second auditory event. A faint whisper emerged from the analog radio receiver's speaker. The sound was barely perceptible, resembling a human voice attempting to form words, but ultimately indecipherable. The whisper lasted approximately 10 seconds and occurred without prior static or signal fluctuation. I recorded the entire event and included a timestamp. At 4:23 hours, I reviewed the fuel levels of the propane heater. Remaining fuel was estimated to last for approximately 6 more cycles at current usage rates. At 5:47 hours, I conducted another perimeter inspection. The footprint impressions remained unchanged. The snow surface showed no additional marks, tracks, or disturbances since the prior inspection. By 7 o'clock hours, I maintained strict adherence to the logging schedule. Nutritional intake was further reduced to maintain fuel reserves, adjusted to 1,100 kilocalories per day. Water intake remained at 500 milliliters daily. At 8:22 hours, the analog radio receiver emitted a third anomaly. The static briefly transitioned into a sustained tone at 750 Hz, lasting approximately 5 seconds before returning to baseline noise. At 10:15 hours, I performed a second review of the Project Polaris files. No additional information was found beyond prior entries. At 11:56 hours, I observed a second set of footprints appear in the snow, approximately 9 meters from the first set. Measurements: length 28.1 centimeters, tread pattern identical to the first set, depth 1.3 centimeters. The new impressions were aligned parallel to the original set, suggesting 2 individuals walking side by side. I documented the discovery methodically. Photographs taken from multiple angles, time logged at 11:56 hours. I attempted to rationalize the phenomena, possible residual markings from prior expeditions. The environmental conditions suggested no fresh snowfall or wind patterns sufficient to create such impressions naturally within the last 24 hours. By 13:42 hours, I performed another satellite communicator diagnostic check. The device remained non-functional. At 15:05 hours, the analog radio receiver produced a fourth anomaly. A continuous low-frequency pulse maintained for exactly 27 seconds, with amplitude variance of plus or minus 3 decibels. No identifiable pattern. At 17:18 hours, I prepared the final ration packet. Supplies were now projected to last no more than 7 additional days. By 1854 hours, I activated the cabin's emergency beacon. The device transmitted a standard distress signal on designated frequencies at 2-minute intervals. Transmission success could not be confirmed due to satellite communicator failure. At 20:07 hours, the rhythmic tapping returned. The sound followed the exact same 3-second interval as previously recorded. Duration: 17 minutes. At 22:31 hours, the static intensity reached its highest level to date. The low-frequency pulses now occurred every 42 minutes. At precisely 0:01 hours, day 5, I recorded my final entry for this period. The isolation grows heavier. The anomalies increase in frequency and consistency. Footprint impressions multiply without explanation. Radio signals suggest external interference, but lack any decipherable content. The heater continues to operate with intermittent failure. My physical condition remains stable, though mental strain is evident. Objective documentation remains my only refuge. No one else is here. Day 5 inside the cabin began at 7:14 hours. The storm showed no signs of abating. Wind velocity remained steady at 75 kilometers per hour. Visibility did not exceed 2 meters. External temperature remained constant at -71 degrees Celsius. My body temperature registered 35.8 degrees Celsius. Heart rate measured at 93 beats per minute. I continued strict adherence to my logging protocol, recording every physiological reading, every action performed, and each environmental measurement. At precisely 8:22 hours, I conducted a thorough examination of the cabin's filing cabinet. Previously, I had examined only the topmost documents. This time, I removed the lower drawer, which I had initially overlooked due to frost accumulation. Inside, I discovered a set of old, metal-bound folders labeled Project Polaris Confidential. The folders were aged, the metal rusted but intact. I extracted the documents carefully, ensuring digital copies via my tablet's camera. The contents included detailed handwritten reports, typewritten experiment protocols, and several photographs. None of the photographs bore identification marks. The images showed various interior shots of the same cabin in different states of disrepair, and several subjects in isolation, wearing expedition suits similar to mine. Faces were intentionally obscured by frost or deliberately blurred. One document, dated December 3, 1985, described an experiment conducted by a government agency. The study, as stated objective, was to analyze the psychological effects of extended isolation in extreme cold on subjects. The document outlined methodology: subject to remain in isolation for a minimum of 30 days. Daily logs required. Communication with control limited to daily status reports. All external interactions prohibited. Unexplained variables to be documented. Another entry, dated January 7, 1986, read verbatim: subject reports persistent tapping sound within the shelter. Denies external cause. No structural breaches detected. Experiment to proceed unchanged. A third document, dated March 14, 1986, provided the final known report. Subject ceased all written communication after 42 days. Subsequent attempts to establish contact failed. The shelter was found intact. No trace of subject remains. I documented each entry without interpretation. The factual nature of the reports precluded subjective analysis. At 10:03 hours, I performed a secondary inspection of the analog radio receiver. The static remained consistent. Low-frequency pulses now occurred every 39 minutes. No discernible changes in amplitude or pattern. At 12:45 hours, I initiated a second detailed perimeter inspection. Utilizing the handheld thermal imaging sensor, I conducted a full 360-degree sweep outside the cabin. The results indicated no heat signatures other than my own. Approximately 30 meters from the cabin, I identified what appeared to be a shallow depression in the snow, measuring approximately 1.5 by 2 meters. The depression was symmetrical and showed no obvious disturbance. No footprints led to or from this formation. I recorded this finding with precise photographic evidence, including dimensions and GPS coordinates. I did not attempt to disturb the formation. At 14:37 hours, the analog radio receiver emitted a fifth anomaly. For a continuous duration of 62 seconds, the static transitioned into a low hum at 700 Hz. The hum was steady, without amplitude modulation or identifiable variation. At 16:18 hours, I revisited the Project Polaris files. One additional document, previously overlooked, was titled Final Evaluation Report. Polaris Study Closure. The report stated, all subjects failed to maintain coherent communication beyond day 40. Observed anomalies include unexplained auditory phenomena, recurrent footprint impressions within shelter perimeters, and intermittent equipment malfunctions. Investigation inconclusive. Project classified indefinitely. The report concluded without further explanation. At 18:53 hours, I prepared the evening ration. Remaining food supplies estimated to last no more than 4 additional days. Fuel reserves similarly projected to deplete within 5 cycles of heater operation. By 2014 hours, the rhythmic tapping recurred for the 4th documented instance. The pattern remained consistent. 1 tap every 3 seconds, sustained for exactly 17 minutes. At 22:37 hours, I conducted a second analysis of the footprint impressions. A third set appeared to have emerged overnight, approximately 8 meters from the previous sets. Measurements: length 28.3 centimeters, tread pattern matching prior impressions, depth 1.2 centimeters. At 0:04 hours, day 6, I made the following final entry for this period. The historical data recovered from the Polaris project. Documents reveal consistent anomalies during prior isolation studies. The presence of unexplained auditory phenomena, recurring footprint impressions, and regular equipment failures is documented without conjecture or theoretical interpretation. The cabin's environment remains consistent. The storm continues. The propane heater functions intermittently. Food and water supply critically low. No human presence other than my own is observable or measurable. All actions continue to follow strict chronological documentation. Day 6 inside the cabin began at 7:18 hours. The storm persisted with unchanged intensity. Wind velocity maintained between 75 and 90 kilometers per hour. Visibility did not exceed 1 meter. The external temperature remained constant at -71 degrees Celsius. My body temperature registered 35.7 degrees Celsius. Heart rate measured at 95 beats per minute. I continued to follow the logging protocol rigorously, recording each measured parameter, every action, every environmental observation, all with precise timestamps. At precisely 8:37 hours, I conducted a routine inspection of the remaining fuel for the propane heater. The gauge indicated approximately 30% remaining capacity. Calculated fuel reserves projected to last no more than 3 additional heating cycles at current usage rates. By 10:12 hours, the analog radio receiver produced a sixth anomaly. The static shifted into a faint but consistent voice-like murmur, resembling an unintelligible conversation in the background. The murmur persisted for 79 seconds before returning to standard static. At 11:45 hours, I performed a detailed re-examination of the cabin's structural integrity. No breaches, no structural anomalies, and no indication of external tampering. All sealed vents and joints remained intact. At 13:02 hours, a fourth set of footprint impressions appeared in the snow, approximately 7 meters from the previous set. Measurements: length 28.2 centimeters, identical tread pattern, depth 1.3 centimeters. Their alignment suggested a linear progression from the cabin's entrance into the surrounding environment. At 15:24 hours, I attempted to recalibrate the satellite communicator once again. The device remained unresponsive. Diagnostic readings indicated complete system failure. At 17:58 hours, I prepared the final measurable water ration. 400 milliliters melted from snow. The process required 3 hours of continuous heating to produce sufficient volume. At 18:36 hours, I initiated a second attempt to analyze the analog radio anomalies, using the internal microphone array and spectrograph analysis software on MY tablet. The recordings displayed repetitive low-frequency patterns that did not correspond to any known human or environmental frequency signature. At 20:13 hours, the rhythmic tapping occurred for the 5th documented time. Identical pattern. One tap every 3 seconds, sustained for exactly 17 minutes. At precisely 22:44 hours, I performed a final perimeter inspection using the thermal imaging sensor. The second depression in the snow, first identified 2 days prior, remained unchanged in size and structure. No heat signatures other than my own were detected. No movement observed. At 23:59 hours, I prepared the final ration of freeze-dried food. Remaining supply projected to last exactly 2 more days at the current rate of consumption. At exactly 0:01 hours, day 7, I recorded my final entry. The isolation and anomalies continue without logical explanation. The footprint impressions are now 4 distinct sets, appearing in consistent intervals. Their linear alignment suggests movement, but lacks origin or destination. The analog radio receiver continues to produce intermittent voice-like murmurs and low-frequency pulses of regular periodicity. All attempts at rational interpretation have failed. The structural integrity of the cabin remains uncompromised. Propane reserves critical. Food and water supply critically low. The storm is continuous. My body temperature has stabilized at 35.7 degrees Celsius, with no indication of hypothermic threshold breach. Heart rate steady at 95 beats per minute. The temporal sequence of events remains documented, objective, empirical. At precisely 1:37 hours, the rhythmic tapping occurred for the 6th and final documented instance. One tap every 3 seconds for exactly 17 minutes. I activated the internal microphone array once more at 4:21 hours. The analog radio receiver emitted a final anomaly. A faint, indistinguishable human-like voice speaking directly into the microphone, sustained for 24 seconds before ceasing entirely. At 6:03 hours, I performed the final diagnostic of the cabin's equipment. All power sources were operational, but at minimal capacity. No additional anomalies were observed during system checks. At 8:12 hours, I prepared this last recorded log, the final objective entry in chronological sequence. I do not know if I will survive beyond this point. I do not know if help will arrive. I do not know if I am the only one here. The official recovery operation began on March 28, 2018, following a scheduled satellite pass that detected the emergency beacon signal emitted by the cabin. A rescue team composed of 2 personnel and a remotely operated vehicle, ROV, was dispatched from McMurdo Station. The external conditions remained harsh, with wind velocity at 80 kilometers per hour and visibility under 5 meters. The storm showed no signs of abating. The cabin was located at coordinates 7,751 S, 16,640 E, as recorded in Dr. Miller's logs. Upon arrival, the structure was found intact, identical in appearance to the previous reports. The door was breached using standard cold weather entry protocol. Interior conditions were recorded meticulously. Ambient temperature, -18 degrees Celsius, heater inoperative. All recorded materials, digital recorder, Project Polaris files, photographs, analog radio receiver preserved without external disturbance. Dr. Nathan Miller was not present. No body, no clothing, no personal effects aside from the documented equipment remained within the cabin. No signs of physical trauma or struggle were observed. The analog radio receiver continued to emit static, punctuated by the same low-frequency pulses recorded in Dr. Miller's logs. The internal microphone array captured a continuous faint hum at approximately 700 Hz. All footprint impressions in the snow were preserved. The 4 distinct sets remained in their recorded positions. No additional footprints or signs of other individuals approaching or departing the cabin were identified. Recovered documents and data were transferred to secure storage. The emergency beacon continued to emit periodic signals, consistent with standard protocol, but never interrupted or confirmed by satellite reception post-recovery. Investigators compiled a report classified under Project Polaris archives, citing, "The disappearance of Dr. Nathan Miller remains unexplained. All empirical data indicates the presence of external anomalies, without identifiable source or rationale. All equipment functions within expected parameters aside from irregular analog radio static and unexplained footprint impressions. No evidence of foul play, structural compromise, or environmental sabotage found. Subject's disappearance remains open." The final entry of Dr. Miller's digital recorder, timestamped at 0:01 hours on day 7, was included as an unaltered transcript. Subsequent analysis of the analog radio recordings revealed faint, human-like murmurs layered beneath persistent static. Spectrograph analysis failed to identify consistent linguistic patterns or known encoding methods. The Project Polaris files were archived indefinitely, marked as confidential and inaccessible to the public. The official conclusion of the investigation stated, "Certain phenomena exceed current scientific understanding. No definitive cause established. The emergency shelter remains sealed and preserved, now a fixed point of scientific anomaly. No further expeditions have been dispatched. No additional reports of similar events have emerged. Some questions do not deserve answers. Some places on Earth are not meant to be explored. Some signals are not meant to be heard. Some silence is not meant to be broken. Despite all attempts at explanation, some anomalies defy reason. Science records the facts, but sometimes the facts are not enough. In the vast emptiness of Antarctica, where nothing grows and nothing survives, perhaps the true danger is not the cold, the isolation, or the storm, but the unknown presence that watches, waiting, always waiting."